Hello, everybody. Welcome to this People Before Profit meeting on racism in America and Ireland. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. My name is Ivanka. I'm from People Before Profit Belfast, as well as United Against Racism Belfast. It's incredibly important for all of us to be at meetings where we can discuss diagnose the problem of racism and also offer, practical solutions, practical ideas on how collective resistance can happen. In the last few weeks, we've seen an incredible activity from the Black Lives Matter movement. First in the United States of America after the murder of George Floyd. That sparked a much needed and a long overdue conversation about police brutality in the United States and about institutional racism, historic and deeply rooted institutional racism. We've seen a lot of activity in Ireland as well. We've seen people gather for peaceful protests across this island to express their solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as to say that racism is something that we all have a stake in eradicating, and that it's time to look at some of the difficult questions that we're facing as a community. It's my absolute pleasure today to introduce to you the two speakers we have. Both of them are in a perfect capacity to speak about racism as a class issue, as a structural issue, and also to address one of the things that struck me the most as a migrant living in Ireland, that racism is not an Irish problem. We don't have racism in Ireland. Racism only happens in the United States. So what's the point in protesting? I think the two speakers today would give fantastic answers as to, is there racism in Ireland? And why is it incredibly important for the Black Lives Matter movement to continue in strength? Our first speaker is Brian Kelly. Brian is a US historian focusing on the history of racism against people of color from Queen's University, Belfast. Our second speaker is John Uwhumiakpor, the People Before Profit candidate for Balbriggan. We'll start with Brian. Brian, please take it away. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Ivanka. And I have no idea how I can tell if there's actually anybody out there, but I hope there is, and want to welcome people along. I want to say just a few things to set the context for a discussion that we might have over the next 40 minutes or so. And John will say more about the situation in Ireland, but I'll say maybe a few things at the end. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that the past 2.5 weeks has proven what kind of power the Black working class in the United States has to transform the political landscape. So if we think about where things were at 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, a year ago, great kind of concern and resentment over the continual racism emanating out of the White House, a president with historically low approval ratings, but one that really doesn't seem to get to be dented by popular opinion, and one which just a presidency which has all along been flirting with the far right, with racist ideas, but which didn't seem to be paying a price for it. Today, we have a situation where the political landscape's been completely transformed over a period of 3 weeks. And that's happened mainly through the power of the Black Lives Matter movement and the reaction against the horrific police murder of George Floyd. Now, we have to ask ourselves, I would say this also, the political landscape has been transformed globally, not just in the United States, but if we look at the demonstrations in every corner of the world that have broken out over the last 2 weeks around racism, from Brazil, South Africa, parts of the Middle East, all throughout Europe, the United States, and the Caribbean as well. I mean, a massive global movement that is attempting to force our rulers, who've had it all their way for a very long time, to confront the issue of racism, systemic, endemic racism. So it's a global movement that's broken out. But we need to ask this question. George Floyd's murder, as horrific as it was, captured on film over almost 9 long, agonizing minutes, vicious murder, is not the first of these. It's one of a string of police murders of African-American men and women that the public has witnessed over the last 5, 6, 7 years, stretching back into the Obama administration. So this isn't a problem that begins with Trump either. But why is it that this particular incident set off the kind of powerful upheaval that we've seen around the world? And I think if you ask that question and try to answer it honestly, you'll find out very quickly that the reaction against the George Floyd murder is not just about police violence. So although that's been the kind of issue which set it off. But if you look at who's being mobilized in the streets, if you look at the range of issues that people are making demands around, it's really about the whole kind of deterioration of life for working class people, and particularly for the most oppressed sections of the working class. In the United States, that will be African Americans, Latinos, and others, many of them trapped in the most socially deprived communities in the US. It's not just about police murder, but police murder kind of encapsulates the incredible levels of misery that have been imposed on the most deprived sections of the working class over a period of 15 or 20 years. And so I see the reaction that we've seen over the last 2 weeks as a kind of a powder keg that was waiting to explode, but a powder keg that we can only explain by setting police violence in a wider context of increasing poverty, of obscene gaps in inequality between the very wealthy and the very poor, of the long-term assault on the welfare state, of stagnating wages, decades of neoliberalism, and of a resurgent far right. That is a kind of swaggering racist right that has been able to repopularize the most vulgar kind of racist bile, and has done so mostly unanswered until now. Now I would say, and I saw a friend of mine on Facebook had something on this morning saying, now at least the far right has a fight on their hands. And I think that's true, that we see the potential in the movement on the streets, not only to confront the issue of police violence, but to begin to push back against Trump, Stephen Miller, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, all the bigots, Emma, what's her name, or the far right lunatic in the south of Ireland, whose name I forget, but I'm sure we'll get to it. So all these things come together, and they come together too. The last piece of this is a global pandemic which has exposed how little our rulers actually give a shit about the lives of ordinary people. How low in the rank of in the list of priorities, human needs, people's health ranks far below profits. The need for businesses to reopen and so forth and so on. So all this comes together. And if we look in the US at who's been coming out into the streets, I would say it's mainly a whole generation of multiracial activists and people who've not been activists until now, but people who are coming out who basically face a very difficult future unless we're able to turn things around. About 5 or 6 years ago, we started seeing articles appear saying that the generation coming up in the United States was the first generation in more than a century that could expect to live more difficult lives than their parents had or than their grandparents had. That is, the standard of living for working people has actually declined in recent years. Large numbers of young people, if they're able to go to university in the United States, they come out saddled with debt that they'll spend the next 15 years of their lives paying off. And this is the generation that we saw coming out for Bernie Sanders. This is a generation that we've seen open their minds to socialism. And it is the generation, too, now led by courageous Black Latino activists that has come out onto the streets to say enough is enough. And we're done with seeing the police get away with murder in broad daylight as they did with George Floyd. So the dam has burst in the US. The dam has burst. It's been pent up for a very long time. But I think George Floyd has opened the floodgates of resentment, of the kind of crushed aspirations of a generation of young people, of the choked voice of African Americans and others who've been putting up with it for far too long. I'll just say a couple other things and then let John come in. What this means in the US immediately is that you have a very serious political crisis that neither of the two main political parties, the Republicans or the Democrats, is in a position to solve. And this is very significant, I think. Already you had a generation, you had a layer of particularly young voters or would-be voters who have watched the way that the Democratic Party establishment has done everything in its power to ensure that Bernie Sanders doesn't get the nomination, which has done everything in its power to ensure that corporate backed neoliberal centrist Democrats are the ones who will get the nomination to go up against Trump. And so people are already pissed off at the Democratic Party. Now we see a Democratic Party which has nothing to say about the question of police violence, which has nothing to add to the conversation about what to do about the epidemic of police murder in the United States, and which is very clearly the Democratic Party's strategy in the present moment is to duck down, keep their heads down, and wait for this moment to pass because they've got nothing to offer, especially to young people. The Republican Party is, obviously not a solution for anyone interested in securing racial justice in the United States. But they're in deep crisis as well. I would say that Trump has been able to ride through, an almost daily litany of blunders almost unscathed. That is, he hasn't had to pay a political price because the Republican Party has been willing to back him until now. For the first time, I think, because of the power of the movement in the streets, Trump is on the run and is very desperately scrambling to find a strategy that can deliver the election for him in November, in this coming November. And I think it will be very difficult. I mean, he's not the most capable person anyway. But The right has had things their own way for one reason only, that there's not really been an effective movement to challenge them. They've not faced any effective opposition. That's changed now with the rise of Black Lives Matter, with the rise of protests. And I mean, it needs to be said, you know, we talk sometimes, you know, people who have been around revolutionary politics in the US for 40 or 50 years look back nostalgically at the upheaval of 1968. I'll end here, Ivanka, in 2 seconds. The difference here is what we've seen unfold in the last 2 weeks is far greater in intensity, in scale, in the number of people being drawn in the power of the movement. In many ways, all of us, anyone alive in the US, and those of us looking in from the outside, are living through the most important social upheaval of our lifetimes. And it's one that won't go away. Its reverberations will be felt for a very long time. So the US ruling class is in deep crisis. There is a whole generation of people looking for change, demanding change, and I don't think they'll be easily bought off. This has implications for Ireland as well, as it does for every other country of the world. And I'll end with this. This is a crisis that won't end anytime soon. We're coming out of a global pandemic. Already we're entering into a period of economic crisis. And this means that all the grievances that have funneled into the powerful protest movement that's broken out in the US, all those issues are likely to become even more urgent as economic crisis sets in. So everything to play for the left and for those who want to change society. There's also a menacing far right that we'll have to deal with. But I mean, this is definitely the most powerful movement any of us have seen in our lifetimes, I think. So I'll leave it there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this, Brian. A very to the point and very interesting overall commentary on the Black Lives Matter movement and the state of, I suppose, liberal politics, and the opportunities this presents to the left to organize and demand for change. Now, if I can ask John to focus us now on the local side of this conversation. This is the most important social upheaval of our time, as Brian says, but I think still a lot of people don't think that Ireland is the place for this movement to also take place. So if I can ask John now to come in, please. Hi, John.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And as I've been rightly introduced before, my name is John Uwhumiakpor, and I live in Balbriggan, representing Balbriggan People Before Profit here, and in Finger, if I may say, the constituency. So it is really a very sad situation that we are in, despite the fact that the whole world is grappling with the pandemic that is killing people worldwide. And here we are talking about Black Lives Matter. So I will really want, it's something that I will want to go far and wide. I'll be very brief on that. When we look back, the years back in America when there was slavery, that was the first dispensation of the blacks in America was slavery. After the slavery was abolished, then the dispensation of segregation set in. And during that period, civil rights movement triggered up. And ever since then, the issue of black suppression has been. So the question I want to put before our mind is, where is the Human Rights Watch? What is the position of the Human Rights Watch? And what is the position of social justice? So all these are questions that we need to understand that humanity is one. Humanity is one. So when we look at it from that perspective, why should a certain race struggle to overcome some level of social injustice over time? And if we say there is no such issues here in Ireland like racism and all that, so we have blacks all over the world, as if I may say so, and these blacks are the same, whether they are Black Americans, whether they are Black British, whether they are Black Irish, or they are Black Africans. They're all blacks, and whatever one suffer from represent the whole of those people. So if one person is killed because he's black, the same fate awaits every other one that are every other places. So this is the situation that we are in. Now, coming back home, Ireland, which I would not really want to be 100% in terms of history, in terms of experience, but I will say that I'm just here for the past 14 years. And over the period of this time of staying in Ireland, there are a lot of issues that I have seen, and the issue of racism cannot be underscored, or it cannot be ignored, because what is happening in cross Atlantic over there is spilling up here. Look at what is happening in France. There are a lot of Africans that lives in France, and there was experience of an African lady that was killed. And when the issue of George Floyd came up, it resonated again, and the experience of protest also came up again. So, and people have to come out in numbers, those that see themselves as Africans, and those who doesn't support such kind of social injustice, such oppression, such suppression. They have to come out to support that. No, this cannot be. So the issue of racism has been, and I have questioned myself, why do we have Human Rights Watch? Why do we have Court of Justice? And if people are there that are enforcing all these laws, are watching these things happening years, so are those people in that situation really holding on to justice? Are those Human Rights Watch, are they really upholding the right of humans? I have said it that there shouldn't be what is called Black Lives Matter. All life matter. But because of the fact that this race has suffered so many years of oppression, so many years of suppression, and these have created a kind of variation in human value. Therefore, the blacks has been seen as they are subhuman being. They are not actual human being. So if they are not actual human being, therefore they have to fight hard to prove that their life have to matter. In so many countries that I have found out in over the years, they don't consider the blacks as people that should be there. When you seek for a job, you cannot be considered first, because they feel you are not able to handle such kind of situations. You can't do that job. It's like the African race is complementing the other race, and that is the reason that they continue to suffer this fate of this racism. It's rather unfortunate. We have how many continents in this world? We have African continent, we have the Asia, we have Europe, we have the America, South and North, and the Oceania, and all these continents are filled with people, and they don't have the same color. But we are all one race, human race. But the continent that suffer more in the hands of oppression is the African continent, dating back to colonization, then before independent, and now we're talking about racism. There is no any such word of independence. Africa does not have independence. They are just there. They are being controlled in one way or the other. And when they come out of their country to seek for a better life or to seek for a certain level of justice, they will also be suppressed. So this has been ongoing. So it is a situation that has created a lot of fear in many Africans. And when they come out, they find it very difficult to represent themselves. They find it difficult to have a voice because they know whatever they will say, whatever they will do, might not be accepted. And this has created a lot of anger that have triggered a lot of violence. Killing George Floyd has brought about the level of how the blacks has been suffering. Now, the police officer who killed him is now being charged for a murder. Why did he kill him? George Floyd that was killed is now an icon of hope for the Africans. So with the people in position who want to address this, they have to come out. Honesty. Let's be honest. Let's be realistic. The truth is we are more diplomatic in the use of dealing with situations. If you say the way it is, you will be held accountable. Oh, look at what you have said. You should have said this. Because that is the situation. But people becoming more diplomatic in face of reality. And this is why the problem of injustice, social injustice, will never end. Now we talk about the working class. There's a difference between suppressing people, oppressing people, and people facing racism. There's different picture. When we talk about the social stratification, the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class, the lower class suffer oppression in the hands of the upper class because they don't want them to come on board, to be in the level that they are. So there are policies that are in place to make sure those people are suppressed. They will not rise above that level. And it's different from people that is being oppressed. So we should try and understand the division of what is happening in the society. The working class is being oppressed and suppressed by the elite. While the assertive race in the world that is being pushed aside because of their color. So these people that have been pushed aside because of their color, they are still under that level, that social stratification that is low. So they are fighting racism. They are equally fighting oppression, suppression. Just name it. So it's a different situation when we want to look at it. The only way this issue can be really dealt with is when we become honest about the issue. We have to be honest. We have to face the reality on ground. There are different problems in the society today. Some people are being oppressed because they don't find their bearing in the society. Some people are being marginalized because they are not part of people that supposed to be. So when we put all the things together, we begin to look at it as a problem that is one. It's not one. The issue of race is a problem in the world. The issue of social classification is another problem. You see, so we need to look at all this in a very realistic point of view or holistic point of view in order to address all these things. If we keep looking at them from one angle or from one perspective, the situation would never be addressed. And that is exactly the way I see it. The Black America have suffered. This is not because they are lower class. They were pushed down that ladder, and that is why they are there. I think I don't know who was asked. Sophie Ridge was asking. I don't know whether one of the ministers, how many blacks are in your cabinet? He couldn't answer the question. He was unable to answer the question that, okay, we have one black in our cabinet. or we have one Africa in our cabinet. He couldn't answer it that we have one India, one from the Asia. We know we have the exchequer is an Indian, and the Home Secretary is an Indian, or if I know it's by the name, but those are not Africans. So the question is, how can they contribute if they are not given that room to contribute? The people before profit, that name speak volume. Is a name of a party, but I know it speak volume. People before profit, and people before profit should not only stand up for what is right for the people, but how can everyone be equal before the law? That is it. So it's not easy to see an oppressed, suppressed, marginalized person to have that courage to come out and say, this is the situation. We have Human Rights Watch. What have they said? Over the years, Africans have been suppressed. What has the social justice, all those institutions that have been put there to justify that there is justice for everyone? Why should the Black life matter? Black life shouldn't matter if all life matter. Therefore, Black life does not matter unless they stand up to make it matter. And that is what I don't really understand. I said it before, Black life does not matter because all life matters. If all life matter, therefore, there is no life that matter more. And another thing I will say here again, why should we have Black History Month? All race has history, so there shouldn't be a specific history of any race. We all have history. We have Black Friday. Why is Black Friday? So there are terminologies that are associated with the Black that make them look somewhat that people see. And I know nobody was born racist. Nobody was born racist. People were taught to be racist. So not until we begin to connect with the reality of what the world has put the situation of what the human race is passing through today, there will not be peace and there will be no justice. So we need to be realistic about this. Let us look at the situation that we are facing today. The situation of what the black Africans are facing is not the same under social stratification of lower class and middle class. That is a different thing. The Africans are suffering under the social stratification, whether we have them in the middle class, whether we have them in the higher class, or whether we have them in the lower class, is different from being under suppression on being African. So we need to look at this. So I'm calling back the social justice, then the Human Rights Watch. What are their stand in order to address the situation of having a one race and human race? So I will leave it here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. You pose a number of very important questions for all of us to try and answer. What is the point of having international human rights organization and watchdogs if they are not going to comment, for example, or if they're not going to help take radical action to change where we are? I'm just in a hurry now to read some of the questions that we've gotten in this discussion. But before that, if you just allow me for a minute to send a message on behalf of United Against Racism. United Against Racism is asking people, yes, to take a knee. Take the knee on Saturday at 6 p.m. in your own location. Organize yourselves and send us photos so we can continue putting pressure on institutions to act. Okay, now let me see a few of the questions here. There are quite a few that I want to ask you. There is a question here about the climate crisis on this island. Being one of the biggest issues facing the planet. and it is going to contribute a lot to the refugee crisis. So would the panel comment on this? If I can ask you just to limit your answers as much as you can, so I can ask you more of the fantastic questions we have coming forward. Brian, do you want to go first, perhaps, in this order as we've been all evening?
Okay, I'll just comment in a very general way. I mean, when I was arguing at the beginning that that we've seen in the reaction around George Floyd's murder, a kind of a cumulative frustration of people over a whole range of issues bursting forth. Part of that, I think, is about the climate crisis. We've seen big demonstrations last spring, lots of young people, especially involved in protests around Extinction Rebellion and so forth. The COVID-19 crisis, I think, as well. So in many ways, we have a crisis on many fronts that is already leading millions and millions of people, particularly among younger people, to the conclusion that the present order is not capable of even sustaining humanity, or certainly not giving us a decent life. So the climate crisis, I would say, is a part of this, and is a big part of this. And I think the person who asked the question is right, that this is likely to exacerbate the refugee crisis all around the world in the coming years. And it's, people in the most vulnerable people on the planet are the ones who are going to be pushed around by the climate crisis, just as they have been by war and poverty and oppression. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, the left has to be very clear that we're against border controls. We're against any blocks on human beings being able to move around the globe as they want. And we have to fight within the trade unions, within the labor movement, and in society as a whole to defend the rights of migrants to move mm-hmm. around.
Thank you very much. John, what are your thoughts about climate change being another pressing issue that we're facing as a global community, another pressing issue that saw a mass movement? What is the connection between the plight that refugees are suffering at the hand of structural racism and the growing problem of the climate change that we're facing?
Yes, thank you very much. I think the climate change situation is another aspect of injustice in the world. Every country in this world, they are not equal in terms of industrialization. So some of them have more industrialized capacity and the emission of what the CO2 they bring in terms of how they want to produce so much in order to make as much profit as possible. It's driving the climate into a very serious situation. And as much as many poor countries, especially in the Africa and some other part of the world, mm-hmm. could not sustain they don't have the capacity to manage the change in climate. Therefore, what happened is it will be more migration to different parts of the world, and that will not create more problem in the aspect of this social injustice and oppression that has been, because some countries are already been overflown by the rise of sea level. And what happened to the people? They have to start moving from where they are to the next. And when they see many of these migrants in other parts of this part of the developed world, they say they are economic migrants. And by the declaration of what qualifies anyone to be a refugee status is have to be either maybe political, or his life is not safe wherever. It's not about economy, and they forget that what they have been doing in their various countries has contributed to the problem of climate. So this is as a result of injustice that is leading to the crisis of climate. So if they know that the life of everyone, irrespective of which continent they live, matters, they will know that there are certain things that they should not do in order to address this emission of CO2. So it's about profit for the people, you know.
Thank you very much, John. If I can ask you both again for a quick answer, but before I forget, the United Against Racism call for people to take the knee is actually on Friday, tomorrow. I'm in the north, but I'm not a day ahead. I don't know why I feel like I am. Anyway, very quickly, this mass movement that we're seeing at the moment, a global mass movement, can we use the power of this global mass movement to tackle some of the racist institutions and practices we have here? For example, can we get rid of direct provision once and for all? And also, what do we need to do as the organized left, as the trade union movement, as working class people organized, to make sure that we tackle racism? I'll ask you for very quick answers here because we have to wrap up. Brian, do you want to go first? Can we get rid of direct provision? What do we need to do as the organized left here? Sorry, Brian, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Right. Sorry, Ivanka. Look, the people in the South have been involved in the direct provision longer than more than I have. But obviously, it's a horrible stain on Ireland. And particularly for a country which for the last 2 centuries has sent people to every corner of the world. I think the time is right for a major push on direct provision. I think people have to be serious about mounting a campaign that can win over the next few months. That is, that it draws in every trade union, all the kind of artists and cultural figures that you can, to a major campaign around direct provision that is aimed at winning the thing in the next few months. That means it has to be resourced. It means it has to be, serious agitation, not just aimed at kind of keeping it in the press, but at forcing the government to shut down direct provision and treat people like full human beings, as they should be.
John, can we end direct provision now?
Yes, the direct provision is inhuman or inhumane because I was once there for a couple of few months. It's not a place that one should be. So when we talk about justice again, because I will continue to highlight this, justice. What is justice? Justice when things are equal, when things are fair. So if the government who are enforcing justice in the land, they could not understand that some people are passing through some certain inhumane treatment as a result of their policies. Why should we see them as people who really want to believe that there are some certain level or a certain situation in the society that should be justified by doing what is right? So I keep wondering, why should we continue to push for certain things that are right to be done? So I don't really understand. So we keep the pressure through all the various institutions who are ready to work to make sure that every human being is equal, to put this right. And I'm very happy that people before profit has been standing up in all this area, organizing a lot of rallies and groups that will help to make this work or make this happen. But it's very sad, I will say again, if some few people have to bear the majority or the few the few elite that are ruling the country, that we need to beg them for them to understand that there should be justice for few other people.
I think that's a great place to finish this conversation for today. The knowledge that the Black Lives Matter movement liberated us collectively to demand the end of racist institutions like direct provision, as opposed to wait for the establishment to awaken itself to the cruelty of the system. I think that's a great message for all of us to take forward in this continuing struggle against racism in the North, in the South, and globally. The time has come, the dam has burst, and we can make the demands that we've waited a long time to make. And on that note, I want to wish you solidarity in your movements where you are. Please keep United Against Racism posted on what it is you're doing by sending photos. And we'll be seeing you again for another conversation very soon. Thank you both, Brian and John, for a wonderful discussion tonight. Solidarity, comrades from Belfast.
Thank you, Brian.